The freight mare kicked hard enough to splinter the wagon rail, but while half of Hartwell Crossing shouted for ropes, Robert Hale stepped back and watched Rachel Davis walk straight toward the terrified animal. Everyone in town expected wealthy Big Hale to notice Charlotte Whitcomb that day. Instead, Rachel found the torn strap cutting the mare, freed it with one steady hand, and quieted her beneath the Nevada sun. Robert said almost nothing. Then he asked one question that made Charlotte's smile disappear. And before long, that question would reach far beyond courtship, into a debt that could cost an entire valley its only winter trail. Who would you have watched in that street? Stay with me. The mare screamed before Robert Hale ever reached the hotel. Her iron shoes struck sparks from the packed road as she kicked against the freight wagon, twisting hard enough to drag one wheel into the watering trough. Men scattered, a sack of oats split open beneath the wagon, pale grain spilling into the red Nevada dust. "Get her head!" someone shouted. "Don't touch her head!" The second voice belonged to Rachel Davis. She came out of the livery at a run, skirts gathered in one hand. She was 30, dark-skinned, plainly dressed, with her sleeves rolled above her wrists and dust already on the toes of her boots. She did not look at the men crowding the mare. She looked at the harness. "Back away," Rachel said. The freighter stared at her. "She'll break the tongue. She'll break herself first if you keep pulling." Another violent kick shook the wagon. Rachel stepped closer. Across Hartwell Crossing, conversations stopped. People had been watching the western road for Robert Hale. Now they were watching Rachel walk toward 1,200 pounds of frightened horse. The mare's eyes showed white. Foam darkened the bit. Rachel saw the problem when the animal twisted again. The belly strap had torn halfway through. A broken edge of leather had folded inward and was cutting into the mare every time the harness tightened. Rachel lowered her voice. "All right, girl." The mare jerked. Rachel stopped. She waited. Dust drifted between them. When the mare's ears turned toward her voice, Rachel moved again. One hand went to the buckle. The other lifted the loose end of her sleeve over the animal's near eye. Easy. The buckle came free. The pressure vanished. The mare shuddered from nose to tail. Then she stood still. Only then did Rachel hear the horse behind her. She turned. Robert Hale had stopped in the middle of the road. Everyone in Bristlecone Valley knew the name. Hale Ridge Ranch ran cattle from the foothills toward the high meadows beneath the Ruby Mountains, and Robert owned more good breeding stock than some men saw in a lifetime. He was also difficult to miss. At roughly 6'7", he sat unusually high even on the big bay beneath him. His shoulders filled a weather-darkened coat, and his hands looked capable of closing around a fence post. There was nothing theatrical about him. No silver pistol, no bright neckcloth. His hat was brown, his boots scarred, and one glove had been repaired across the palm. Men who had never spoken to him tended to lower their voices when he entered a room. Robert looked at the mare, then at the torn strap, then at Rachel. He had remained several yards away through the entire struggle. Rachel noticed that. A man his size could have charged in and tried to overpower the animal. Most men would have. He had known better. "You can bring her forward now," Rachel told the freighter. The man took the lead rope with considerably less confidence than Rachel had shown. A soft laugh came from the boardwalk. Charlotte Whitcomb descended the hotel steps beneath a pale blue parasol. She had dressed carefully for the stock sale. Cream-colored gloves, a fitted green traveling dress Amos had ordered from Elko the previous spring. Her light brown hair was pinned neatly beneath a small hat. 3 men near the general store straightened when she passed. Charlotte was accustomed to that. She stopped before Robert with a smile that had worked on nearly every unmarried man in Hartwell Crossing, Mr. Hale. "Father said you might arrive today." Robert removed his hat. "Miss Whitcomb, my father will be pleased. He has been talking about nothing else since breakfast. That sounds dangerous." Charlotte laughed. Robert smiled politely. Then his eyes returned to the livery. Rachel was kneeling beside the damaged harness. showing the freighter where the leather needed replacing. Robert put his hat back on. Who taught Miss Davis to read a horse that quickly? Charlotte's smile remained. Only her fingers tightened slightly around the parasol handle. Rachel? Yes, she has always been around horses. Robert looked once more toward the livery. That isn't what I asked. By sundown, half of Hartwell Crossing had heard about it. Not that Robert Hale had arrived. Not that he had brought 6 breeding mares for the autumn sale. Not even that Amos Whitcomb had invited him to supper. They talked about the question, who taught Miss Davis? Rachel heard 2 women repeat it outside the general store while she was buying coffee. She paid 12 cents, tucked the paper packet beneath her arm, and walked home without turning around. Whitcomb Ranch stood 3 miles north of town, where the valley began rising toward the Ruby Mountains. The house had once been white. Nevada wind and 20 hard winters had reduced it to a tired gray. Rachel loved it anyway. She had buried her mother on the hill behind it. That made leaving complicated. It did not make leaving impossible. Inside her room, beneath 2 folded work dresses and an old Bible, Rachel kept a tobacco tin containing $83.40. Every dollar had a purpose. Sage Post Relay Yard. The abandoned station stood near the eastern approach to Ruby Pass. The roof leaked, 2 stalls had collapsed, and weeds grew through the wagon shed. Rachel could see something else when she looked at it. Fresh boards, sound stalls, a ledger with her own name written inside the cover. She closed the tobacco tin when Charlotte called from downstairs. Rachel? Father says Mr. Hale will be here at 7. I heard him the first 3 times. Charlotte appeared in the doorway. For a moment the sisters looked at each other. They had grown up beneath the same roof but not in the same way. Charlotte had been taught piano and proper correspondence. Rachel had learned freight accounts because Amos hated keeping them, and cattle tallies because hired men sometimes counted poorly. Charlotte glanced at Rachel's plain brown dress. You're wearing that? I generally wear clothes to supper. Charlotte almost smiled. Almost. He is an important guest. Then I suppose he'll be relieved we have plates. At 7:10, Robert Hale ducked beneath the Whitcomb doorway. Amos greeted him with both hands. Hale, come in! Come in! Robert removed his hat and immediately seemed to make the dining room smaller. Rachel watched him adjust without drawing attention to it. He turned sideways past the china cabinet rather than bump it. When Charlotte's chair caught on the rug, he moved it with 2 fingers and returned his hand to his side before she had to thank him. That restraint interested Rachel more than his strength. Supper was roast beef, potatoes, beans, and biscuits. Charlotte carried most of the conversation. She asked Robert about Hale Ridge, about the stock sale, about whether he ever traveled to San Francisco. Not if I can avoid it, he said. You dislike cities? I dislike sleeping where I can hear 6 strangers through a wall. Amos laughed loudly. Charlotte tried again. Rachel ate quietly while checking figures on a folded invoice Amos had left beside his plate. She frowned, then checked again. Mus. He kept talking. Mus. What? This Briggs bill. His expression changed slightly. What about it? You paid for the September 8th feed wagon. I expect I did. They charged it again on September 22nd. Amos reached for the paper, but Rachel held one finger against the line. Same wagon number. Same 160 sacks. Same driver. Probably a copying mistake. $26.40 is an expensive copying mistake. Charlotte exhaled. Rachel, must we discuss freight bills tonight? We'll discuss them whenever $26 disappears. Amos's jaw tightened. Briggs has carried this ranch through 2 bad winters. I'm not accusing the man of stealing over a clerk's error. Rachel folded the invoice once. All right. She knew that tone in Amos. Push harder, and he would stop listening altogether. She placed the paper beside her plate. A large hand reached across the table. Robert pulled the invoice toward himself. Show me. Rachel looked at him. Amos stopped chewing. Robert did not seem to notice. Show you what? Where the numbers stopped making sense. Rachel unfolded the bill. She pointed to the wagon number, then the dates, then the identical weight written beside both entries. Robert read without interrupting. That wagon couldn't have made both deliveries. It could have. But the second receipt says it was unloaded at Whitcomb at 4 in the afternoon. And? Rachel tapped another line. The same wagon is listed on Briggs's public freight sheet as leaving Hartwell Crossing for Elko before noon that day. Robert looked up. For the first time that evening, his expression changed. Not much, but enough. So one record is false. One of them has to be. Amos pushed his chair back. Enough account books. Hale didn't ride here to audit my feed. Robert returned the invoice to Rachel. Charlotte smiled and reached for the coffee pot, but Robert was still looking at Rachel. I'm glad somebody does. The clock on the mantel ticked once, twice. Rachel lowered her eyes to the paper. Charlotte poured coffee until the cup was nearly full. Robert left shortly after 9. Amos walked him to the porch with Charlotte beside him. Rachel stayed behind to collect the cups until she remembered the bay horse had been tied near a loose section of hitching rail. She carried a lantern outside. Robert was already there. He had one hand beneath the bay's jaw while he checked the knot. Up close, Rachel had to tip her head farther back than she liked. Your horse is safe, she said. I suspected he might be. Then what are you checking? The rail. Rachel lifted the lantern. One nail had pulled almost free. Robert pressed it back with his thumb as far as it would go. I'll tell Amos in the morning. He nodded. For several seconds, neither spoke. From the porch came the faint sound of Charlotte laughing at something her father had said. Robert rubbed the bay's neck. I need to move mares across Ruby Pass soon. Rachel looked toward the black outline of the mountains. How soon? Before the weather turns. Then don't use the south approach. Why? Loose shale above Miller's Cut. Lost a wagon wheel there in August? Robert absorbed that. The north shelf? Still passable the last time I rode it. When was that? 6 days ago. He turned toward her fully. Most men asked Rachel questions and began forming their own answer before she finished. Robert simply waited. She found that oddly difficult. The shelf is narrow, she continued. And if we get rain, I'd check the upper bend before bringing mares through. The ground there slips before the rest of the trail does. Robert nodded once. Thank you, Miss Davis. You're welcome, Mr. Hale. He mounted. The bay shifted beneath his weight, but Robert settled into the saddle with the ease of a man who had spent more years on horseback than in chairs. Rachel stepped back. He gathered the reins, then stopped. I may ask you about that trail again. Rachel held the lantern against the wind. You can ask. Something almost like amusement touched his face. I noticed. He rode through the gate. Rachel remained beside the hitching rail until the hoofbeats faded down the valley road. Only then did she realize Charlotte was standing on the porch. Her stepsister said nothing. Neither did Rachel. Between them, the lantern flame bent sharply in the mountain wind. Far down the road, Robert Hale disappeared into the dark. And on the dining table behind them, beneath an empty coffee cup, the Briggs freight invoice remained unfolded. By sunrise, rain had washed the dust from Bristlecone Valley. It had not been much of a storm, barely enough to fill the wagon ruts outside Whitcomb Ranch. But high beneath the Ruby Mountains, even a short September rain could loosen stone that had rested quietly all summer. Rachel knew that before she saw Robert coming. She was carrying 2 buckets from the pump when his bay appeared beyond the cottonwoods. Behind him rode 3 Hale Ridge hands with 6 breeding mares tied in pairs. Amos stepped from the barn. Hale. You're early. Need to cross Ruby Pass today. Amos looked toward the mountains. I can send Tom and Lewis with you. Robert dismounted. I came for Miss Davis. 1 bucket stopped swinging. Rachel set both down. Amos frowned. Rachel, she rode the north shelf 6 days ago. Rachel wiped her wet palms on her skirt. If you're asking me to guide those mares, Mr. Hale, say so. Robert met her eyes. I'm asking you to guide those mares. She studied him for a moment. Then I'm not going as company. No. And if I tell you a section isn't safe, we stop. Rachel nodded toward the mares. Give me 20 minutes. Charlotte had been standing behind the screen door. Rachel saw her only when she went inside for her coat. You're going with him? I'm going through Ruby Pass, with Robert Hale, with 6 mares. They're the ones most likely to cause trouble. Charlotte gave a short laugh, but it had no humor in it. You know what people are already saying. Rachel took her gloves from the wall peg. People in Hartwell Crossing can turn a loose horseshoe into a scandal before supper. That doesn't mean you have to help them. Rachel paused. Charlotte's face was composed, but one hand had tightened around the edge of the door. I'm doing a job I know how to do, Rachel said. Then she went outside. The climb toward Ruby Pass took most of the morning. Sagebrush covered the lower slopes. Higher up, juniper gave way to exposed gray rock, and the trail narrowed until 2 horses could no longer ride comfortably side by side. Robert did not try. He stayed behind Rachel. That mattered. Men unfamiliar with the pass often pushed ahead because they mistook confidence for knowledge. Robert watched where she placed her mare's feet and followed the same line. Near 11, Rachel raised one hand. Everyone stopped. Ahead, the north shelf looked wrong. A section of the outer edge had fallen away during the night. 2 old rail posts leaned toward the drop, and wet earth had collected beneath the remaining boards. One of Robert's men swore quietly. We can turn around, he said. Rachel dismounted. Not yet. She crouched beside the trail and pressed 2 fingers into the soil. Robert came down from his horse but remained behind her. What do you see? Water ran under the upper post. Can it hold? Not with those mares leaning against it. Robert looked at the warped rail. What do you need? Rachel glanced at him. It was such a simple question that she almost missed what was unusual about it. Not what should we do, not move aside. What do you need? An axe, rope, that short timber tied behind your packhorse. Robert turned. Ben, bring them. For the next hour, nobody spoke much. Robert drove a new post into firmer ground, while Rachel cut away the loose section. He held the warped timber level as she secured it with rope and 2 lengths of wire from her saddlebag. His hands could do in one pull what took another man 3, but he did not hurry her. When she tested the rail, he waited. When she shook her head, he moved the timber another inch. There, he held it. Rachel tightened the wire. The first mare crossed calmly, the second stopped halfway. Rachel went to her head. Easy, May! The mare blew through her nostrils. Robert stood on the uphill side, one hand near the rail. Rachel took another step. The mare jerked suddenly. Rachel's boot slid in wet gravel. Robert caught her elbow. His grip closed firmly enough to stop her fall. Nothing more. The instant her footing returned, his hand opened. You all right? Rachel looked down at the loose stones disappearing over the edge. Yes, Robert waited. Rachel looked at him. Yes, she repeated. Only then did he step away. They moved all 6 mares across. By early afternoon, the clouds had broken apart, leaving sharp blue sky above the Ruby Mountains. They stopped near Sage Post. The abandoned relay yard sat in a shallow basin below the trail. Its sign had fallen years ago. One corner of the barn roof sagged inward, and rabbit brush grew around the hitching posts. Robert expected Rachel to ride past. Instead, she turned toward it. You know this place? He asked. I know every rotten board. She dismounted beside the wagon shed. Robert followed. Inside, sunlight came through gaps in the roof. Rachel walked between the empty stalls. This wall has to come out. Robert pressed a palm against one post. It does. Roof can be saved over the west half. East half needs new rafters. You've thought about it. For 6 years, Robert turned. Rachel ran her fingers over the edge of an old feed box. I'm going to buy it. He said nothing. She glanced at him. Most people laughed when she said it. Amos called it foolishness. Charlotte called it lonely. Two different men in Hartwell Crossing had told her she would need a husband before anybody trusted her with freight horses. Robert only looked around. What would you rebuild first? Rachel blinked. The stalls, not the house. Horses pay before bedrooms do. That brought the faintest smile to his face. How many stalls? 12 eventually. 6 first, and the wagon shed. After winter, you'd handle freight. Light freight to begin with. Hartwell Crossing to the Elko Road. Feed, tools, mail if I can get the contract. Relay horses during stock season. Robert leaned against the post. Rachel suddenly became aware of how much she had said. She folded her arms. You think it's too much? No. You haven't even heard what it costs. You didn't ask whether I thought you could afford it. She frowned. What did you think I meant? I thought you asked whether the work was too much. He looked around the ruined barn. It isn't. For some reason, that answer stayed with her all the way down the mountain. By the following week, Hartwell Crossing had noticed. Robert asked Rachel about a lame gelding at the stock pens. He waited for her opinion before buying winter oats from a farmer near La Muelle. When two ranchers argued over whether snow would close Ruby Pass early, Robert looked across the general store and said, Miss Davis? Rachel answered. Robert listened. That was all. It was enough. At the dressmaker's shop, Charlotte heard two women talking behind a curtain. Big Hale hasn't looked twice at anybody since he got here. He looks at Rachel Davis. He asks her about horses. The other woman laughed softly. Maybe Hale likes a woman with a ledger better than one with ribbons. Charlotte left before her fittings was finished. That evening, Rachel found her sitting alone at the kitchen table. No lamp had been lit. The last daylight came through the window and lay across Charlotte's hands. You embarrassed me, Charlotte said. Rachel stopped near the stove. When? Don't. Rachel waited. Charlotte stood. You know exactly what is happening. No, I know what people are saying. They're laughing at me. Rachel's expression changed. I never asked them to. You didn't have to. Charlotte turned toward the window. All my life, Father told me I didn't need to understand cattle because I was pretty. I didn't need accounts because I would marry a man who had someone for that. I didn't need to know how to mend a harness or judge hay or bargain over freight. Her voice became quieter. He said I only had to make a good match. Rachel said nothing. Charlotte looked back at her. And now the richest unmarried rancher in the valley comes here. And everybody expects him to notice me, she swallowed. But he asks you about horses. Charlotte, what am I supposed to do with that? There was no anger in the question now. That made it harder. Rachel pulled out a chair, but did not sit. You could decide what you want. Charlotte laughed once. You make that sound easy. No. Rachel looked toward the darkening yard. I know it isn't. A wagon rolled through the gate. Neither woman recognized it. Heavy wheels stopped outside the house. A moment later came 3 measured knocks. Amos emerged from his office. Rachel opened the door. Harold Briggs stood on the porch. He was 50, neatly shaved, wearing a dark wool coat despite the mild evening. A leather document case rested beneath one arm. Evening, Miss Davis, Mr. Briggs. His eyes moved past her. Amos home? Amos stepped forward. What is it, Harold? Briggs entered without removing his coat. He placed the leather case on the dining table, the same table where Rachel had found the doubled freight charge. From it, he removed a folded paper. Then another. Amos's face lost color. Rachel saw the heading before he could cover it with his hand. Promissory note. Briggs set one finger on the amount due. 1st of October passed 3 days ago. I know what day it is, then you know why I'm here. Charlotte came closer. How much? Amos did not answer. Rachel took the paper. The principal was larger than she expected. Much larger. Feed credit, wagon charges, Interest carried from the previous winter. Her eyes moved to the final paragraph. Something in her stomach tightened. This isn't secured only by cattle. Briggs looked at her. No. Amos sank slowly into his chair. Rachel read the line again. Livestock, outbuildings, specified access rights attached to the Whitcomb holding. She raised her eyes. What access rights? Briggs buttoned his coat. That, he said, is what your stepfather and I will discuss tomorrow. He picked up his case. At the doorway, he stopped. You were right about one thing, Miss Davis. Rachel waited. The missing $26 wasn't the important number. Then he walked into the night. The wagon rolled away. No one spoke. Charlotte stood near the cold stove. Amos stared at the promissory note. Rachel remained beside the table, one hand resting on the paper. Outside, wind came down from Ruby Pass and rattled the loose boards on the barn. For the first time in years, Rachel did not think about how much money she still needed to buy Sage Post. She wondered whether, by spring, the Whitcombs would have any road left to reach it. Harold Briggs returned at 9 the next morning. He arrived alone. That bothered Rachel more than if he had brought 3 men with him. A man expecting trouble brought witnesses. A man certain of his advantage brought papers. Briggs carried only his leather case. Amos had been awake since before daylight. An untouched cup of coffee sat beside him at the dining table, a thin skin cooling across its surface. Charlotte stood near the window in a dark blue morning dress. Rachel had already placed the promissory note in front of her. She had read it 4 times. Briggs removed his gloves. Not here to take your cattle, Amos. Amos gave a tired laugh. That's supposed to comfort me? It should. Briggs opened his case and produced a second document. I'm offering an extension until spring. Amos looked up. Rachel did not. What does it cost? Briggs glanced at her. 10 years. Now she looked at him. He pushed the paper across the table. Exclusive commercial use of the Ruby Pass stock trail. Freight wagons, contract cattle, relay traffic. Anything moving for profit. Charlotte frowned. You want a road? I want access. Rachel read the first paragraph, then the second. By the third, she understood. No. Amos turned toward her. Rachel, if he controls Ruby Pass commercially, he controls half the valley. Briggs smiled faintly. Half? When winter closes Cedar Spur, every ranch north of Hartwell uses Ruby Pass to move stock toward the Elko Road. Then perhaps somebody ought to maintain it. You mean charge for it. I mean run a business. Rachel pushed the agreement away. Small outfits will have to use your wagons, your feed, or your credit just to get cattle through. Briggs put his gloves on the table. Small outfits already use my credit. That's exactly the point. Amos rubbed both hands over his face. How long do I have without the agreement? Briggs checked his watch. Not long. A horse sounded outside. Charlotte moved toward the window. Rachel did not need to look. She recognized the bay. Robert entered a minute later, ducking beneath the doorway with his hat in one hand. He saw Briggs, then the papers. What happened? Amos stared at the table. Rachel answered. He wants Ruby Pass. Briggs stood. I'm discussing private business. Robert remained near the door, then finished discussing it. Briggs' mouth tightened. Rachel explained the terms. Robert listened without interruption. When she finished, he asked Amos one question. How much do you owe him? Amos hesitated. Briggs answered. Robert's face did not change. I'll pay it. The scrape of Rachel's chair cut across the room. She stood so quickly the coffee trembled in its cup. No, Robert looked at her. Rachel, no. Briggs watched them both. Rachel walked outside. She heard Robert behind her before she reached the barn. Rachel, she kept going. He caught up near the corral but did not touch her. I can clear the note today. That isn't the point. It keeps Briggs away from the trail. and puts you between me and every decision that comes after. I wouldn't ask anything from you." She turned. "That makes it worse." Robert went still. Wind moved through the cottonwoods above them. Rachel folded her arms. "Not from cold. You heard what people say. You know what they already think. I don't care what they think. I do when I have to live among them." His jaw shifted. "Let them talk. Easy for you to say." Robert's eyes narrowed slightly. Rachel continued before he could answer. "If you pay Amos's debt, Briggs disappears, and everyone calls you generous. Then what am I?" "Rachel, the woman Robert Hale rescued. That isn't what I'm doing. Then what are you doing? Keeping you safe." There it was, quiet, certain, almost kind. Rachel stared at him. Then she said the words slowly enough that he could not misunderstand them. "Then ask me what safety costs before you purchase it for me." Robert said nothing. She could see that the words had landed. His hands hung at his sides, hands strong enough to lift a gate from its hinges, hands that could not fix this. Rachel stepped past him. He did not follow. Robert Hale stayed away for 2 days. Rachel told herself she preferred it. On the third morning, she rode to Sage Post with a measuring cord, a carpenter's square, and a notebook. The air had turned colder. She measured the first stall, 10 feet, then the second. She was kneeling beside a rotten sill when hoofbeats entered the yard. "Robert." He dismounted but did not approach immediately. 2 canvas-wrapped bundles were tied behind his saddle. Rachel returned to her measurement. "I don't need money, I know." She looked at the bundles. "What's that?" "Old shipping schedules." He untied them and carried them into the barn. Rachel stood. Robert placed the bundles on an overturned feed box. Hale Ridge cattle records, freight receipts, trail charges. 20 years of things I should probably have organized before now. Rachel stared at him. "Why? Because Briggs has been hauling through Ruby Pass longer than I've owned Hale Ridge." He removed his gloves. "If he's been planning this a while, I want to know what he thought he was buying." Rachel said nothing. Robert looked at the measuring cord in her hand. "I owe you an apology." She waited. "I'm used to fixing whatever is in front of me. That isn't always a fault." "No." He glanced around the ruined relay yard. "But being strong enough to carry something doesn't give me the right to take it out of somebody else's hands." The barn was quiet. A loose piece of tin clicked softly on the roof. Rachel pulled the feed box closer. "Sit down." They worked until afternoon. Culled cattle tallies came first, then wagon schedules. Robert's handwriting was unexpectedly careful, Rachel noticed. "You write like a school teacher." My mother believed bad penmanship was a character defect. Rachel smiled despite herself. Was she right about mine? An hour later, Rachel stopped smiling. She had found the same phrase 3 times. Stock passage reservation. She pulled another ledger closer. "Robert." He leaned across the box. "What?" This A Hale Ridge freight entry from 1871 listed a fee for grazing animals overnight near Ruby Pass. Beneath it was a notation. Passage exempt under original reservation. Robert read it twice. What reservation? I don't know. They searched another bundle. A receipt from 1874 referenced the same exemption. Then another from 1879. Rachel sat back. Whitcomb Ranch was part of the original Valley holding before Amos bought it. Meaning, my mother kept the old deed papers. Where at the house? Robert looked toward the mountains. If there's a reservation attached to the deed, Briggs may not be able to close the trail. For the first time in days, Rachel allowed herself to breathe. They packed the ledgers carefully. Outside, late sunlight had turned the dry grass gold. Robert leaned against the barn doorway. You really were going to do this alone? Rachel looked at the empty stalls. I still am, he nodded. She glanced at him. You don't object to what? A woman running a relay yard? No. Most men do. I've met most men. I don't recommend using them as a standard. Rachel laughed. The sound surprised both of them. It faded slowly. Robert looked down at his hands. Charlotte said something the other day. Rachel stiffened. What? That people have been calling you unwanted. Rachel turned toward the yard. People say many things. Why that? For a while, she considered refusing. Then she sat on the low stone foundation. A man asked me to marry him once. Robert remained where he was, 3 years ago. He had a small place south of Elko. She rubbed dirt from her palm. He wanted a wife, not me. Robert waited. He said I could stop keeping books, sell my mare, forget Sage Post. He said a married woman had no reason to spend her days around freight yards. What did you say? No. Robert's mouth moved slightly. That was all? All? I may have said it twice. A quiet breath of amusement escaped him. Rachel continued. He married somebody else. Then the story changed. I hadn't refused him. He had supposedly decided I was too difficult. After that, men around Hartwell started saying no man wanted a woman who cared more about ledgers and horses than keeping herself agreeable. She looked toward the broken roof. Eventually, people forget where a story started. They only remember the version they enjoy repeating. Robert came closer, not too close. Maybe those men did want you. Rachel looked at him. He held her gaze, only smaller. Something in her face shifted. Robert raised one hand, then stopped before touching her. The question was there without words. Rachel did not move away. His fingers rested lightly against her cheek. For all his size, the touch was almost cautious. Rachel could feel the roughness of his thumb near her temple. Robert leaned closer, then stopped again. Rachel understood. This time, the choice would be hers. She closed the remaining distance. The kiss was brief, warm, unhurried. When they separated, Robert rested his forehead lightly against hers for one quiet second. Neither spoke. A horse shifted outside. The old tin on the roof clicked in the wind. Rachel smiled first. I need that deed. Robert stepped back. Yes, ma'am. They rode to Whitcomb Ranch before sunset. Rachel went directly upstairs. Her mother's old document box had always been kept at the bottom of the cedar chest beneath folded winter blankets. She lifted the lid, moved the blankets, stopped. The space beneath them was empty. Rachel checked again, then the wardrobe, then beneath the bed. Robert appeared at the doorway, but stayed outside the room. What is it? Rachel straightened slowly. The box. What about it? She looked at the empty cedar chest. It's gone. Downstairs, the front door stood partly open. Cold evening air moved through the hall, and from Charlotte's room came the faint scrape of an empty clothes hanger turning against the wooden rod. Rachel crossed the hall first. Charlotte's door stood open. The blue traveling dress was gone. So was the small leather valise she kept beneath her bed. On the washstand lay a hairbrush, 2 loose pins, and a ribbon Rachel remembered tying around Charlotte's braid when they were girls. Robert remained at the threshold. Rachel opened the wardrobe. Empty hangers. Then she saw Amos's desk downstairs. One drawer had not been closed completely. Rachel pulled it open. His stage ticket envelope lay inside. One ticket was missing. Amos came in from the barn carrying a lantern. What are you doing? Rachel held up the envelope. Where is Charlotte? His face changed. I thought she was in town, with a traveling dress and your stage ticket. Amos set down their lantern. For several seconds he seemed to age in front of them. I didn't give her permission. Rachel went to the window. The road toward Hartwell Crossing was already disappearing beneath evening shadow. Behind her, Robert picked up his hat. I can catch the stage. Rachel turned. He had already reached the door. Robert. He stopped. We don't know she's on it. I can find out. And then what? His hand remained on the latch. Bring her back. Rachel looked at him. That was Robert Hale. See a danger. Saddle a horse. carry the danger away if necessary. 2 days earlier, she might have let him go. Now she said no. He looked over his shoulder. Briggs has stopped asking Amos for payment. Amos stared at her. Rachel continued. The box disappears. Charlotte leaves. Briggs suddenly becomes patient. Robert slowly released the latch. Rachel stepped closer. If Charlotte took those papers, chasing her won't solve anything. Briggs is the one we need to worry about. The old house settled around them. Robert's eyes dropped briefly. Then he asked, "What do you need?" Rachel heard the difference. So did he. Her anger from 2 days earlier did not vanish. But something inside it loosened. "Your old ledgers. You have them. Samuel Knox." Amos looked up. "Knox? He worked the Ruby Pass survey crews before you bought this place." Rachel was already moving toward the table. "And I need Elko." Robert came closer. "The county records? If the reservation was legally attached to the original holding, somebody filed it, even if our copy is gone. Paper burns. Paper gets stolen. County books are harder to make disappear." Amos lowered himself into a chair. "What did Charlotte do?" Rachel did not answer. Not yet. By dawn, they knew. The Hartwell stage agent remembered Charlotte clearly. She had purchased passage south using cash, more cash than she usually carried. The clerk at Briggs Freight remembered something else. Charlotte had entered Briggs' office the previous afternoon carrying a small tin box. She had left without it. Rachel stood outside the freight office while wagons rattled through the morning cold. Robert said nothing beside her. She appreciated that. At last she murmured, "She sold him the box. Maybe she didn't know what was inside." Rachel looked toward the road. No, she probably didn't. That did not make the hurt smaller. Samuel Knox lived 6 miles east of Hartwell Crossing in a one-room cabin with a leaning chimney and 3 old horses grazing behind it. He answered Rachel's knock wearing suspenders over a red flannel shirt. "Rachel Davis, Mr. Knox. Haven't been Mr. Knox since Grant was president. Come in." His memory was better than his knees. When Rachel showed him Robert's ledger notation, Samuel went quiet. "Stock Passage reservation. You remember it? Remember driving stakes for it?" Robert leaned forward. Samuel pointed a bent finger toward the mountains. Ruby Pass was never meant to belong to one rancher. Too many holdings depended on it. Surveyor wrote the passage into the original filing. "Do you remember the number?" Rachel asked. No. Her shoulders fell slightly. Samuel tapped Robert's ledger. "But your dead bookkeeper did." Beside the 1871 notation was a faint series of numbers Rachel had assumed was an account reference. Samuel squinted. "That's a filing number." Rachel was on her feet before he finished. They planned to leave for Elko the next morning. Harold Briggs did not give them the night. Near sundown, a ranch boy rode into Whitcomb's yard with his horse white around the mouth. "They've closed Ruby Pass." Rachel came off the porch. "Who?" "Briggs's men." The boy swallowed. "Put up a gate below the north shelf, charging passage." Robert's face hardened. Rachel asked, "How many cattle above it?" "Carson herd, Miller's, part of the Bell outfit." "How many?" 300, maybe 4. Rachel looked toward the Ruby Mountains. Clouds had swallowed the upper ridges. The temperature had fallen 10 degrees since noon. Samuel, standing beside the wagon, followed her eyes. "Snow." "By tomorrow night," Rachel said. The boy shook his head. "Briggs says anybody who can't pay can take feed credit." Of course he did. Trap the cattle, sell the feed, turn weather into debt. Robert reached for his coat. "We leave now." The first freezing rain found them before midnight. Rachel, Robert, Samuel, and a young Hale Ridge hand named Ben Foster followed the wagon road toward Elko with Robert's ledgers wrapped in oilcloth. The rain hardened against their hats. By 2 in the morning, the road had become black mud. Near Sage Post, they found a freight wagon leaning badly in a rut. One wheel had slipped from the roadbed. A frightened sorrel was tangled against the traces, while the driver tried uselessly to raise the axle. Robert dismounted. Rachel saw what he intended. "Don't lift until I free the horse," he nodded. She cut the tangled trace loose, speaking softly until the sorrel stopped fighting. Now, Robert crouched beside the axle, his shoulders tightened beneath his soaked coat. The wagon rose just enough. Ben shoved a flat stone beneath the wheel. Again, Robert lifted. The driver stared. Rachel did not. She was watching the horse. 10 minutes later, the wagon was upright. They kept moving. Near dawn, Ben's horse slipped, crossing a wash. The young man hit the ground hard enough to lose his breath. Robert was beside him immediately. "No broken leg," Rachel said after checking him. Ben tried to stand and failed. Robert removed his own heavy coat and wrapped it around the younger man's shoulders. "You'll freeze." Robert glanced at Rachel. "I've got enough of me to keep warm." Despite everything, she almost smiled. They left Ben with a ranch family along the road and continued with 3 riders. Rachel kept the oilcloth packet beneath her shirt now, not because the rain would reach it, because nobody was taking those numbers from her. By late morning, the country flattened. Elko appeared beneath the low gray sky, muddy streets crowded with wagons, freight teams, and men hurrying against the cold. The county building stood 2 blocks from the rail line. Rachel's hands were numb when she climbed the steps. Samuel followed. Robert opened the door, but allowed Rachel to enter first. Inside, the office smelled of coal smoke, wet wool, and old paper. A young clerk looked up from behind a high counter. "County records?" "Yes," Rachel said. "Edwin Morris?" The man stood. "That's me." Rachel pulled the ledger reference from beneath her coat. "I need the original filing attached to a Bristlecone Valley holding, Ruby Pass, probably from the early 1860s. Morris took the number, his eyebrows lifted. "That will be in the older volumes. How long?" "If the number is right, 20 minutes. A voice came from the far side of the room. "I don't think you'll need 20. Rachel froze. Robert's body became still behind her. Harold Briggs stepped out from between 2 tall shelves. His coat was dry, his boots were polished, and in his right hand was Rachel's mother's tin document box. Briggs placed it on the counter. The metal made a small, hard sound against the wood. "I believe this is what you're looking for." Rachel's eyes stayed on the box. A folded document rested beneath Briggs's fingers. Her mother's handwriting was visible along one edge. Samuel Knox removed his hat. Edwin Morris looked from Briggs to Rachel, suddenly much more interested in the room than he had been a moment earlier. Robert moved half a step forward, then stopped. He looked at Rachel. He did not ask whether she wanted him to take the paper. He did not reach for it. He waited. Briggs smiled. "Miss Davis, you rode a long way through miserable weather for something I already possess." Rachel removed her wet gloves one finger at a time. Then she laid Robert's ledger on the counter. "No, Mr. Briggs." Her voice was quiet. "I rode all this way to find out whether that paper belongs to you at all." Harold Briggs smiled. "That is precisely what this paper establishes." He unfolded the document on Edwin Morris's counter. Rachel recognized her mother's careful notation in the margin. Beneath it lay older writing, faded brown with age. Briggs placed one finger near the heading. "Original Whitcomb holding, Ruby Pass included." Rachel did not look at the heading. She read the page, all of it. Robert stood behind her, silent enough that she could hear the courthouse clock ticking in the next room. Briggs grew impatient. "You can read the title as many times as you please." "I already read the title." Rachel moved the paper closer to the window. "What I'm reading is this." Her finger stopped halfway down the page. Briggs's smile disappeared. Rachel read slowly. "Ruby Pass Stock Trail reserved in perpetuity for passage of livestock belonging to adjoining holdings." Nobody moved. Samuel Knox stepped forward. "That's it." Briggs turned. You stay out of this. Samuel ignored him. That's the language Surveyor Bell used. I remember because we had to reset the eastern markers after the spring runoff. Edwin Morris took the document. Let me see. He crossed to a wall of heavy record books and pulled down a county volume. Dust rose from the leather cover. Rachel gave him the filing number from Robert's ledger. Morris turned pages, once, twice, then stopped. His finger moved down the entry. Same filing number. Briggs came to the counter. That document belongs to Whitcomb Ranch. The land does, Morris said. The passage reservation doesn't. Briggs' face hardened. Morris looked again at the county volume. This language is part of the original recorded instrument. A later owner could mortgage the ranch. He could sell the ranch. But this reservation remains attached. Rachel let out a breath she had been holding since Hartwell Crossing. Briggs looked at her. You think this changes your debt? No. Rachel folded her hands on the counter. It changes what you can buy with it. For once, Harold Briggs had nothing ready to say. Robert looked at Rachel. There was no triumph in his face, only something quieter. Pride, perhaps, but not the pride of a man who had won something for her. The pride of a man who had watched her win it herself. By noon, the Elko sheriff had read the filing. By 12:30, 4 horses were being saddled. The storm reached Ruby Pass before they did. Snow had begun sticking along the north shelf. Cattle crowded the high side of Briggs' toll gate, bawling in the cold, while ranchers burned precious hay to keep them from scattering. Briggs's men did not argue long when the sheriff arrived. The chain came down, the gate swung open. Rachel rode through first. Keep them slow, she called. Don't crowd the shelf. Robert took the rear. For 3 hours they moved cattle down the pass. No speeches, no cheering. Only leather creaking, hooves striking stone, men calling through snow, and Rachel riding back and forth along the line whenever nervous cattle began pressing too close together. The last steer reached the lower meadow after dark. An older rancher named Walter Bell climbed stiffly from his saddle. He had ignored Rachel's advice more than once over the years. This time he removed his hat, Miss Davis. Rachel waited. That Sage Post place, what about it? You still planning to open it? Yes, I'll need 6 horses kept there come spring. Rachel looked at him. Walter rubbed his jaw. If you're taking business, I'll be taking business, he nodded. Then 6. Another rancher overheard. I could use freight hauled twice a month. A third man said, You repairing the wagon shed? Rachel glanced toward Robert. He was standing several yards away. He said nothing. A small smile touched her mouth. Yes, she answered, I am. Charlotte returned 3 days later. Her stage had made it only as far as a station south of the valley before snow closed the road. Amos brought her home. Rachel was repairing a bridle at the kitchen table when Charlotte entered. Her traveling dress was stained at the hem. Her gloves were gone. She looked tired, not ruined, not transformed, just tired. I heard about the pass, Charlotte said. Rachel kept working. I heard about the document. Rachel set down the bridle. Charlotte placed a small envelope on the table. Briggs' money. Rachel looked at it. I thought California was what you wanted. It is. Then why come back? Charlotte swallowed. Because I don't want to arrive there with money I earned by selling something that wasn't mine. Silence settled between them. I'm sorry, Charlotte said. Rachel looked at her stepsister for a long time. Charlotte's eyes filled. Can you forgive me? Not today. Charlotte flinched. Rachel's voice remained gentle, but that doesn't mean never. Charlotte nodded. A tear slipped down her cheek. Rachel pushed the envelope back toward her. Return it yourself. I will. And after that? Charlotte gave a weak laugh. I suppose I find out whether I'm capable of anything besides being looked at. By December, she was working at the Hartwell Hotel. She carried plates, kept guest accounts, and put part of every week's wages into a small envelope marked California. Winter buried Bristlecone Valley in white, Then winter passed. By April of 1889, the Sage Post yard no longer looked abandoned. 6 stalls stood straight beneath a repaired roof. The wagon shed had new doors. Fresh hitching rails ran along the yard. Rachel had purchased the property with her savings, helped by deposits from the spring contracts she had earned after Ruby Pass. One morning, she climbed a ladder carrying a painted board. Robert steadied the ladder below. She looked down. "I can hold this myself." "I know." "Then why are you holding it?" "Because ladders are poorly designed." Rachel laughed. She drove the last nail, then climbed down. They stood together in the road. Above them, black letters crossed the new board. Davis Horse and Relay. Rachel stared at her name. For years, she had written it in account books belonging to other people. Now, it hung above her own gate. Robert took off his hat. "Rachel." She turned. Something about his voice made her still. "I've been trying to decide how to say this without deciding anything for you." She folded her arms. "That sounds difficult. It has been." He reached into his vest pocket. No grand gesture followed. Only a small silver ring resting in his palm. "I don't want your business." Rachel's eyebrows rose. "I'm glad we settled that first. I don't want your land. I don't want your books. And I don't want you smaller so I can feel larger." Her smile faded. Robert stepped closer. "I want mornings when you tell me I'm wrong about a horse. I want supper when you're still thinking about freight numbers. I want to know what you would rebuild first for the next 30 years. Rachel's eyes shone. Robert took a breath. "Will you marry me?" She made him wait. "Only a little." "Yes." Hartwell Crossing heard before sunset. Someone at the general store joked that everybody had once expected Big Hale to choose the beautiful Whitcomb sister. Robert was standing beside Charlotte when the remark was made. He did not laugh, he did not look embarrassed, and he did not compare the two women. "I wasn't choosing between sisters," he said. "I was deciding whether I was wise enough to recognize the woman I wanted beside me." Charlotte looked at him, then at Rachel. A small, complicated smile appeared on her face. "That took you long enough." Spring deepened. Rachel's first freight contracts arrived, then the relay horses, then wagons. One warm May afternoon, a driver from Idaho pulled into Sage Post with a broken trace and 2 tired geldings. He climbed down and saw Robert repairing the north rail. Sleeves rolled above his forearms. The driver looked at Robert's size, then at the busy yard. "You Hale? The owner?" Robert stopped hammering. Across the yard, Rachel had one hand beneath a mare's hoof, checking for a lodged stone while a young stable boy held the lead rope. Robert watched her for a moment. The new sign moved gently in the spring wind above her. Davis Horse and Relay. He set the hammer down. "No." The driver frowned. Robert nodded toward Rachel. "She is." Rachel heard him. She lowered the mare's hoof and looked across the yard. Robert met her eyes. No one said anything more. There was no need. Behind them, the Ruby Mountains still carried snow along their highest ridges. Wagons creaked along the road toward Hartwell Crossing. Somewhere inside the office, Rachel's new ledger waited open on the desk, her own name written across the first page. The town had once decided she was a woman no man wanted. They had been wrong about that. But they had been wrong about something more important. Rachel Davis had never been waiting for a man to choose her. She had been building a life worth choosing for herself. And when Robert Hale finally understood that loving her did not mean carrying that life for her, he became worthy of walking beside it. And maybe that was the truest thing Bristlecone Valley ever taught them. Love was never supposed to make Rachel smaller so Robert could become her protector. And strength was never measured by how much Robert could lift, buy, or settle with his own hands. His hardest lesson was learning when to stand back, when to listen, and when to ask what Rachel needed instead of deciding for her. Rachel had learned something too. Independence did not require loneliness. She could keep her name on the sign, her hands on the ledger, and her future in her own keeping, and still make room beside her for someone who respected all three. Even Charlotte was left with a road of her own. Not an easy one. Not one without consequences, but a road where tomorrow did not have to be purchased with somebody else's promise. So when the evening wind moved down from the Ruby Mountains and stirred that new sign above Sage Post, perhaps the important words were never rich, giant, beautiful, or unwanted. They were simpler than that. Choice, respect, trust, and the courage to love another person without asking them to surrender who they are. If you had been Rachel, would you have trusted Robert again after he tried to solve her problems for her? Tell me what you would have done. And if stories about hard roads, quiet courage, and people finding love without losing themselves mean something to you, subscribe and stay with us. There are still many Western stories waiting beyond the next ridge, some tender, some mysterious, and some carrying the kind of healing that takes a long road to find.